As I'm presenting, I also want to invite people on your icon bars at the bottom, the one that gives you your video, your speakers, and so on. There is a place there which talks about either start conversations, which is a chat. Use it as we go along. Should you have a question, you can put it on that chat and we will pick up questions as we go along. But we will have a time when we stop the presentation and attend to questions and comments. So, but if you want to continue to ask questions, make comments, use the chat on your bar of icons. And if also you want to talk whilst I am presenting, you can say so in the chat that you would like to make a point before we get to the questions and answers. So we'll try and manage that. There's someone who is managing, my wife is managing that side of the presentation. So we try to look at when sorry is not enough in your relationship, in emotion, you've hurt each other, and you are trying to really get back to where you should be. And the one says sorry, and you can see that, hey, usori wako has not gone anywhere. And that's what we want to really engage on. And our engagement is going to move from the whole issue of love languages and how do we then come up with apology languages. There's a very good Christian psychologist with Dr. Chapman. Those who know Chapman, who writes the 5 love languages, Dr. Jennifer Thomas and Dr. Gary Chapman have collaborated in a book around apology languages. And that's what we're going to explore as we move on. Now, we all will agree that today there is a high rate of divorce in South Africa and in fact globally. And this rate is not much lower for those of us who call themselves Christians. And I am even tempted to say that rate is even much more within those who are professing Jesus as their Lord. And it has become clear that divorce itself is not the problem, even though divorce generates a set of problems. As soon as you divorce, a new problem starts. So divorce is not itself the problem. It is a source of more problems should you decide to take that direction. And the problem is that people don't know how to be married. Those who have read Dallas Willard's book, The Renovation of the Heart, will start to associate with some of this language, because this is Dallas's view that the problem is that people don't know how to be married. You don't actually get married in many cases, even though you have went through the legal and possibly the religious ceremony, but you still remain unmarried, even though you live in the same house, you sleep in the same bed, you are still in a state of being unmarried. And we must accept that those people who are married, even if we say so sadly, majority of them are incapable of marriage. They are incapable of the kind of constant mutual blessing that can make two people in marital relation literally one person. Because we get into marriage when we become one. The whole issue of oneness is our destination, that when we reach it, then we are capable of marriage. We're capable of living as husband and wife. But if we are not there yet, then our marriage all the time will have turbulences that will emerge from time to time. And those turbulences are driven, I would argue, in most cases by our individual desires and our individualistic temptation in so many areas of life. And it is not their fault, those people who can't really get this mutual blessing. It is not their fault. In this world that we live in, no one knows how could people know what real marriage is. And we get into all these challenges because we know no better. Majority of us, we get into marriage and start to figure out in the middle of marriage. And we realize that we didn't know what we entered into. And we decide, let's proceed anyway and see how this thing is going to pan out as we move forward. And we know no better, particularly today's generation, know no better, because there's no one who teach them. There's no one who takes the trouble of teaching about marriage. What we do, we give words of wisdom at the wedding, and that's the end of it. And we say to the marrying couple, proceed. You'll find each other as you really proceed towards oneness, because oneness is our destination. And Dallas Willard says, this is actually the soul-searing fact at the heart of our modern sadness. When you sit with a young married couple, and as they talk to you, you start to realize how much they don't know about marriage, how much they actually have created their own way of dealing with marriage, when in fact marriage has a framework that all of us must fit in when we get married. We can change certain things, but there are certain things that are of marriage and that are there, and they are meant to be there within any marriage. So to be married is to give oneself to another person in the most intimate and inclusive of human relations. It is to support him or her for good in every way possible. And that support can come physically, can come emotionally, and can come spiritually. So to be married is to give oneself to another person in the most intimate and inclusive of human relations. Now, some of us do attend weddings, and we hear so many things at weddings. One of the things that I normally hear is someone saying, don't try and change each other. When you get into marriage, don't try and change each other. I have come to realize that actually, you don't even have to. Marriage changes both of us. We must change. We can't remain who we were before marriage. So marriage in itself, the consequence of marriage is both of us are going to change. Both of us are going to change. And we need to be willing. We need to create space for that change. Because willingness is actually the desire to allow the change to happen. That's what willingness means in marriage. And there's nothing ever given to humanity more adequately portrays what marriage is than the exchange of the traditional vows. So the traditional vows tell you what marriage is supposed to be. But unfortunately, we remember the vows just soon after the wedding. After that, we forget them. And I have decided to just raise some of the vows in here, and let's just consider some of the wording of the vows. First year. I'm sorry, I know you can see me there. So I've decided to just take us one step back, or many step backs for those who have been married for too long, just to consider some of the wording of the vows. And the wording says something like, I, Mbulelo, take thee, Nombulelo, to heaven to hold from this day forward. I mean, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Now, these are very deep words. These are very deep words. They set the tone for what we are just going to get into. And if you can't grasp the tone of what marriage is going to be like from the vows, then I don't know where you will get what your marriage is going to be like. Because these are very deep spiritual words. I mean, to heaven to hold from this day forward. If you look at that, some of the complaints in our marriages is that we don't hold each other hands. We don't hold hands. We as men have challenges in keeping our wives' hands in walking in town or walking somewhere. We need to be reminded sometimes, and so on and so on. So all these vows, as you enter into marriage, are going to be each one tested. They are going to be tested. Unless you are prepared for the test ahead of you, you are going to be one of those people that Dallas says they can't get married. We can't get married. And I'm saying, even with this once in a lifetime covenant, marriage is still difficult and hard. Even if you embrace the vows, you prepare your mind, you prepare your spirit, you prepare your emotions for the vows, it doesn't mean that will make your marriage not difficult. It will not make it easy, because marriage naturally is still difficult and hard. The standard set in the traditional vows is a very high for a sacred relationship you are looking forward to. And why is marriage sacred? It is sacred because it's connected to the Almighty God, and it is so deserving veneration, so deserving fear. We need to fear God, and if marriage is connected to God, we need to fear to do some of the things that we do in marriage, because marriage is from God and is of God and is for God. It is an institution meant to glorify God. Marriage is an institution meant to glorify God. It is times like those where you have to look at your own marriage and test it against that standard. You need to ask yourself, is my marriage glorifying God? And if the answer is yes, the question that follows need to be, in what way? We know that we all have fallen short of the glory of God. Marriage is in some mysterious way supposed to be a reflection of God. The Genesis account says God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. I cannot help but note that only this marriage existed in a perfect environment, meaning the marriage of Adam and Eve. And the couple certainly did not live happily ever after. Adam and Eve apparently were happy, or at least content, until the devil suggested that they should have something more. Something he implied was very good, something that they deserved, the devil said, and something they needed. Satan's message was, why are you allowing God to hold out on you? You do not have it all. God is holding out on you. There's much more into the future without God. You don't have to listen to everything that God says. This is common language within our marriages. We get to stages where we also say that. We also say that. From time to time, we will feel that we don't need God in our marriages. We are fine on our own. We can do it on our own. And as soon as Adam and Eve got to that stage, that was the beginning of discontent in marriage. It existed ever since. And today, amongst the big problems in marriage, discontent is counted in the top 5. And what does discontent lead to? I want to stop at this point just to check whether we're still proceeding well. We have no problem. Is the screen still fine? The problem is that I can't see the screen from here, from where I am.
The sound is clear. So the screen is also clear. So proceeding.
Is not so small.
So we're still fine.
We're still fine, sir.
Excellent. Excellent.
Tutuse.
Yes.
Ikati ngokanisakuboni wena.
Yes.
Yeah,
I do agree namkukati pha.
Ukwikati ebethu umsila.
Ikati evela
Mhlawumbe
plan.
kufuneka ushukumise iscreen or something, I don't know.
Tiger Tutus. That is Tiger. Tiger weekly shumsi. But sound wise, I went
Awuqonibambeke kancinci.
Hambisa ikati le mfundini.
Okwangoku asinidi ukubona tata, ungaqhuba okwangoku asinidi ukubona.
Ngiyandazi.
Uva kahle.
Ndifuna ilizwi cha.
Siyakukhumbula kaloku tata
ngeli xesha ifoni isatshaja.
Ndiphuma emlonyeni cha.
Unga-change i-camera tata if uyakwazi.
The change camera.
Yeah, but however, if not, continue. We can see the screen and we can hear you clearly. You can continue.
Ima ke nkomo itshintshwa njani kanene?
Qhuba tata.
Ayeke yona.
During break time.
Masiqhubeke.
Break that. Yes, Dad.
Yes, we'll sort it out during the break. Masiqhubeke. And as soon as the devil approached Adam and Eve and said to them, God is holding out on you. You do not have it all. This was the beginning of discontent in marriage. It existed ever since. And today, amongst the big problems in marriage, discontent is counted in the top 5. What is discontent? Discontent is a hopeless dissatisfaction about your circumstances. It's something that there is dissatisfaction, but there is hopeful dissatisfaction. Discontent is the hopeless side of dissatisfaction. You're unhappy in your marriage, unhappy about how things are going in your marriage, and you just don't know what you are going to do. You are saying, I'm going to live from one day to the next and see how this thing works and see how far this will lead us to. And discontent leads you to a state of really learned helplessness, where you have learned to be helpless, where you have accepted that I'm helpless, there's nothing I can do. Now, there are lots of marriages that are in that state of discontent. And that discontent comes from the devil. What does discontent lead to? What does it lead us to? Discontent leads to obvious sins. There are obvious sins when you are discontent. When you are discontent, your mind spins. Your mind takes you everywhere. Your mind starts to show you things. The devil starts to sponsor you with ideas when you are discontent in marriage. It is a very serious position to be in. It's a position that you mustn't allow to be in for one day. Don't live in a state of discontent in your marriage for one day, because it's a very dangerous position to live in. And it leads to obvious sins. And these sins include sins that will plague a marriage. For example, discontent does breed lust in violation of the 10th commandment through desiring the wife or husband of another man or woman. When you're unhappy in your marriage about many things, because discontent comes from many sources. It has a number of sources. One source that makes you discontent, a number of things. Some of those, I'm not respected here, my wife is not respecting me, my husband is not loving me, my wife is too much at home or too much in this, and I don't like it. My husband is too much at work. I know he is working for the family, but still, I still believe he's not taking us seriously. Those things, when they accumulate, the cumulative effect of those negative things leads to discontent, and discontent leads you to obvious sins. One of those sins is a sin that violates the 10th commandment through desiring the wife or husband of another man and woman. It is something that leads many men in particular to adulterous relationships. You would remember that adulterous relationships, you don't have to sleep with a woman or a man. Just by thinking about it and seeing the person, you have committed adultery already. Just by the occupation of your mind by a person of the opposite sex in a way that heats up your blood, you already in an adulterous relationship. Discontent has and still leads to financial disaster and debt slavery, in turn placing untold pressure on the marriage itself. When married people don't talk, lots of things get seriously damaged. A lot of problems are created just by the two of you not talking. Even for a day, there are things that you need to share all the time. You can't share it because you are not talking. So, one of you because some people are driven by discontent to become what is called impulsive buyers. It drives them to go and buy and just buy and just buy. And the next minute you start to see your credit card in a serious state. When you look at the dates, it's the dates that you guys were not talking. So discontent has and it still leads to financial disaster and debt slavery. In turn, those two, financial disaster and debt slavery, does place untold pressure on the marriage itself. The final problem with discontent is that people who are discontent in marriage develop unteachable spirits. When you are discontent, nothing positive comes. Nothing positive comes. If we're discontent in our marriages, we're not capable of learning fundamentals about marriage. The more we refuse to learn, the more we think we know, because we have all kinds of stories under our belts. The irony is that today there is more information overload on marriage that is designed to inflame discontent. The things that are on the internet, some of the books that are written about marriage, they are part and parcel of inflaming discontent in marriage. The journey of love that leads to sorry begins with discontent. When you sort out your discontent situation, you move back to apologize and find a way of getting your marriage back on track to start the journey of love that you started anyway. No one enters a marriage relationship with the intention of simply becoming a sparring partner. Because when discontent is there, you guys fight about even the smallest of things. Everything is a fight when you are in a state of discontent. And the fights themselves are the flames that actually increases discontent. But without knowing how to deal with conflict in a healthy biblical way, we can find ourselves in that situation without knowing how we got there. And that situation is a situation of being sparring partners. If you don't know how to handle conflict in a healthy and biblical way, you can find yourselves that every day it's a boxing match of some sort. It's either with the real weapons, which are the fists, or the other very dangerous weapons, which are the tongues. Because there are two weapons that are used in marriage. It's the fist and the tongues. It depends which one you choose to use at a particular time. They are both dangerous weapons. They are weapons of mass destruction, particularly the tongue. Marriage is where there is argument about one thing or another every day. Run out of love tank. You just get tired even of looking at each other. If every day you have to argue, you don't really explore things. You are arguing, because every time you argue, a bit of love for the other is taken away by the argument. Ukwamagama aphume emlonyeni xa kubethwa intonga, amagama ongenawuze uphinde uwabuyisele. Apho ngoku kuzawufuneka ucela uxolo, where you have to ask for forgiveness because of what you said. How do you diffuse the fights? Because we said fights are the flames from discontent. So because we're discontent, we fight. So we get these flames. Now we need to deal with the fights. Now let me make a clarification between fights and conflict. Conflict is good for marriage as long as you don't fight. Conflict strengthens the marriage. Conflict gives the marriage character as long as you don't fight. What is bad for marriage is fights, not conflict. How do we diffuse the fights in marriage? Let's use the wording in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8 as watchwords for our behavior towards our spouses. Let them not just be biblical words. They must be watchwords. You allow those words to watch you. You allow them to set a standard for you. And the watchwords are: love suffers long and is kind. You need to start to say, am I kind to my spouse? As the first step of diffusing fights, you need to use 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8 as watchwords for your behavior. Is my behavior kind? Is my engagement with my spouse kind? Goes on to say, love does not envy. The amount of envy amongst married couples is frightening today. I know of a couple where the husband encouraged the wife to apply for a senior role. They work in the same organization. And the wife gets the senior role and becomes a senior. Soon after that, they divorced because the husband couldn't just deal with a wife who is in a senior role at work. And the pain the wife was going through was the pain that, but it is my husband who asked me to apply for the job. I didn't just apply for the job. And there is a lot of that. There's a lot of envy within our marriages. And do you know why there is envy? It goes back to Dallas Willard's point that we have not reached the destination of being one person. Because envy will go away the day we become one person. If we're one person, whatever good comes to one of us is our good. It becomes our good. And love does not parade itself. Love is not puffed up. It does not behave rudely. Those are watchwords. Are you rude to your spouse? It does not seek its own. Are you selfish? Because someone who seeks its own is driven by self, and that self becomes selfish. Love is not provoked. Do you think well of your spouse? Because provocation can only come if you don't think highly of your spouse. If you don't say to yourself, I know my wife cannot really go out of her way to just disrespect me. I must give her the benefit of the doubt on this one. And not jump up and down and saying, no, she provoked me, that's why I did what I did. Love thinks no evil, does not rejoice in immoral behavior, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And this kind of love, not just any love, this kind of love never fails. This kind of love never fails. Let's now look at some of the things that happen between the two of us when really discontent has inflamed fights amongst ourselves, and now we're starting to sit back and say, how do we diffuse our fights? The first thing we need to do is to tell ourselves in the process of diffusing our fights, there's no rush. There's always time for each other. The first step is you must say, if we want to diffuse our fights, the two of us must not rush anywhere. We must give time to each other, give time to the challenge that we have. The problem is we have been conditioned to cram as much as we can into the limited amount of time we have each day. And while it may be okay to rush out the door and eat breakfast on the go, or rush to get through a to-do list, rushing through an argument is a fast way to hurt your marriage. There's no rush. Don't rush arguments. Don't talk to each other at the door. You are rushing out and you throw what you throw inside and leave the other one inside the house with words that really were not tested against the watchwords. So rushing through an argument is a fast way to hurt your marriage. What are the don'ts in the rush hour? You might be a pro at fixing your hair or applying makeup on the go or having coffee, but never try to rush through an argument in the car. I have no doubt a lot of us know this. A lot of us know this. I know of a couple that cars had to stand because they were fighting in a car. Their wife, they were fighting over the steering wheel. The car is moving. The car is moving, and cars had to stop and really were very hard on them. So never try to rush through an argument in the car. Having a argument is never a good idea unless you have planned it so. Unless you have said to yourselves, let's take a drive so that we can talk in the car. That's not a argument. That's not a argument. That's a planned conversation. Because if you have a argument, the lack of eye contact and countless distractions are compounded by the approaching destination. You're about to reach work and you say to each other, let's stop this, I don't want to talk about it. And you don't say when we're going to talk about it. Because I have a meeting now that is starting as soon as I get to work. And I don't want to get to that meeting annoyed or angry or hurt. So let's stop this. What are you actually doing? So rushing an argument with your spouse can have devastating impacts. What do you need to do? Those were the don'ts. Don't have a car argument. Don't rush into an argument. Don't do trying to really rush your argument when you're getting to work. But what do you need to do? The first thing you need to do, take the time to work through each and every argument. Give time to your arguments. Really tune in and focus on what your spouse is saying and feeling. Don't listen to the words. Listen to the pain in the words. Listen to the emotions in the words. Don't just listen to the words and say, I've heard these words. I don't have time for this. Show them you care by putting down the distractions and dedicate your time to them. There's some of us who are very busy, who are very important people in our work, who are always on the laptop. And when your wife or your husband comes in, wants to talk to you, you can't just leave the laptop. You talk to them whilst you're typing. And I can tell you now, if you have given 5 minutes to hear why they are coming to see you, you would have avoided something that can happen as a result of what you do. So show them you care by putting down the distractions and dedicate your time to them. You can't control when an argument happens, but you can treat it seriously and avoid rushing through it. The second action that you need to take when there are fights in your marriage is that you must make no threats. Don't threaten each other. And you must also understand that hurt people hurt people. People who are hurt in turn hurt other people. And they have no idea what's the problem. So hurt people hurt people. Let's think about that. Out of hurt, people lash out at one another to share the pain. I feel a little bit better if I have lashed on another person. That's how I feel better. So when I've put someone in his or her right place, then I feel better. That's how I share my pain. And having an argument with your spouse can hurt. Sometimes out of this pain, we can lash out and say things we will regret. What is it that we must not do in no threats? It's important to avoid threats during heated arguments. Threats can come in a variety of forms, but they are all adding fuel to the fire. Don't threaten to trash his car, to call her or his mother, to expose an embarrassing habit. Most importantly, don't threaten the marriage relationship itself. Be careful. Don't threaten the marriage relationship itself. You are married and you know exactly what hurts your spouse. Don't leverage your intimate knowledge against each other. You know your spouse was abused by her father. She told you that. There's some deep secret that is in her heart. She was abused by her father. And you do exactly what her father did. And when she reacts to that, because you need to know how she's going to react to that. She's not just reacting to you. She's actually reacting to her father too. And you say to her, that's why your father abused you. It's because of what you're saying and what you're doing and how you're reacting to this. So don't leverage your intimate knowledge against each other. Information received in a marriage relationship for the purposes of building the relationship must never be used to destroy it. Don't use that information to destroy the very marriage that was the reason and the basis of you sharing the information. What do you need to do in the threatening space? Use your intimate knowledge for mutual good and communicate in ways you know are loving, respectful, and effective. Your special knowledge of each other can build bonds of trust like no other. Knowing that you can confide in your spouse will open up a deeper, more loving marriage relationship. I imagine, I have never been in that position, but I would imagine that there is nothing as painful as not trusting sharing deep things with your spouse, where you are not too sure whether you can share this and it will remain private. The third action that we must be careful of when we try to diffuse our fights, make sure there's no exaggeration in your fights, because inflating the facts inflates the problem. Many couples don't even realize they are guilty of exaggerating during an argument. By now, you know, we have met so many couples, And sometimes I can feel and I can hear when a couple is exaggerating something. But I have come to get to a point where I'm saying, yes, there is exaggeration, but I have also come to this point where I'm thinking, you know, when you're standing in a position of hopelessness, a position of pain, a position of bitterness, a position of hurt, you sometimes see things big. That's what I have come to give couples a benefit of the doubt when I have a sense that they are exaggerating things. And I normally say to myself, I must be careful not to jump to no exaggeration, because when you are standing in a position of fear of tomorrow, you can see things big without you trying to exaggerate. So what am I saying? I am saying there are couples that do exaggerate things. There are couples who share things from a position of fear, and they become alarmists. They alarm in how they share things. So many couples don't even realize that. Even if you're trying to make a point, choose words that accurately define the problem without exaggerating it. What is it that we must not do? In the heat of an argument, it is easy to exaggerate. Saying hot button words like always or never are easy ways to amplify the issue. When there is a fight between you and your spouse, don't use words like always or never, because one incident will disprove your always. For instance, you say to your spouse, you always leave the door open. I'm using something that I battle with sometimes. I'm getting better. You always leave the door open. But I can prove to you that I have closed the door at least once. And if I can prove it once, your always doesn't fit in. So be careful of using extreme words, because some people fight from extremes. Now, fighting from extremes have never resolved a fight. Be careful of always or never, because they amplify the issue. Stay focused on the problem and be honest to yourself. Exaggerating the frequency or extent of a problem can be perceived as accusing by your spouse. So be careful also about that. What is it that you need to do? One, try and be specific. Avoid using extreme words. Not only does inflating the issue misrepresent your spouse, it can distort your own perception of the problem over time. You would start to believe your own exaggeration. And starting to believe your own exaggeration puts you in a very difficult position. It creates a big stumbling block that becomes difficult to ignore. Exaggeration creates a big stumbling block that becomes difficult to ignore. Because now we're going to argue about exaggeration, not the issue that you actually came to deal with. One is going to say, but it is not true that I have done this all the time. And now you can't be talking about the other issue until the one who is actually saying that will be saying, first I want my wife or my husband to clarify this issue before we move on. She says that I have done this for so many times, and I don't remember that. I've done this on 2 occasions. So exaggeration can create a big stumbling block that becomes difficult to ignore when you're trying to assist couples to find each other. What's the 4th thing that people do when they are fighting? They punish each other. And when you diffuse, the fights, you make sure that you don't use punishment. No punishment. Because punishment doesn't produce results. Punish is defined as to inflict a penalty or sanction on someone as retribution for an offense, especially a transgression of a legal or moral code. We all hold moral code, and sometimes it's crossed. It takes more restraint not to retaliate. What is moral to me may not be moral to you. So we all hold moral codes. We just need to be careful to really jump into judgment and punish. We need to be gracious. We need to create some grace for each other. What is it that we must not do in punishment? Some quarrel leads to couples punishing one another, withholding physical intimacy, or giving a silent treatment in order to express your pain is not a healthy way of resolving problems, of diffusing your fights. And some of you have gotten used to that. When you don't give each other silent treatment, you wonder that there's something wrong in your marriage, because it's something that happens almost every week. Small things lead you to just decide, I'm not going to talk to my wife, I'm not going to talk to my husband. And this is the way that she's going to know, or he's going to know, what my problem is if I don't talk to her or him. In fact, it can amplify the animosity and bitterness, making whatever problem to take longer to be resolved. That's what punishment does. Punishments don't have to be obvious. Passive aggression punishments can also have devastating effects. So passive aggression, passive aggressiveness as a punishment can also have devastating effects. Passive aggression is those situations where you just keep quiet. Someone talks to you, you don't respond to anything. Or if you respond without even looking at them. You just keep quiet. Yeah. Apa matsepe, pabla drawer. Full stop. What do we need to do? We need to be clear with your spouse and explain your pain points and work on a solution together. You certainly don't have to tolerate abuse or unhealthy behavior, and you have the right to protect yourself. As you continue to work through the conflict, share the other positive moments and celebrate victories together. Let me talk a bit about, you certainly don't have to tolerate abuse or unhealthy behavior, and you have the right to protect yourself. Some of the things that have happened with a number of couples, you know this is common, is when a wife is dealing with her husband, and the husband has become someone that the wife does not really know and understand, has become violent, has become aggressive in a way that the wife does not know how to deal with him. Some wives have resorted to call the police. Now, calling the police is an unwise decision, something that is unwise to do. But on many occasions, I've said to myself, what else would a wife that is afraid of her husband and doesn't know who else to call, what else can she do? What else must she do? What is it that she must do? Because the person she's dealing with is not her husband. It's some kind of a demon, if I may call it that way. It's someone she has never seen. It's her husband as someone that the wife doesn't know how to deal with. And this happens vice versa, because there are wives that also do that. So I just wanted to make that point, which I think it would be nice to talk about when we start the discussion. So as you continue to work through the conflict, share the other positive moments and celebrate victories together. Be excited when there's something exciting. You have a whole weekend, you didn't fight. Celebrate it as a victory, but know that when you celebrate as a victory, the devil is not happy. He's going to make sure that the next day he plans something that will make you to start fight again. Number 5 is when you want to diffuse the fights, make sure there's no gossiping. And there is a difference between talking and gossiping. Working through a marital issue can be lonely. It can be lonely and it can be overwhelming. We have in some cases worked with couples that were overwhelmed to an extent that we ourselves were overwhelmed. Where ourselves were overwhelmed, where we were not too sure what to do anymore. So working through a marital issue can be lonely and overwhelming. And there is a tendency to seek outside affirmation, where you start to talk to other people and your circle of people you talk to grows by the day. That is gossip. That is gossip. You must be careful of triangulation. Triangulation is talking to a third party about your spouse without them knowing. You speak to someone at work about your husband or wife, and your wife or husband doesn't know about that. And triangulation is a serious intruder in marriage. What are the don'ts in gossiping? One common mistake couples make is to badmouth their spouse to friends or family. Don't do it. You are going to resolve your problems. I'm sure you must have seen this clip of this man who took his daughter to work. And the daughter, I think the daughter was about 4 or 5. And the daughter, as they were walking to the coffee shop, passing people who were like, this is an open plan, the daughter started crying uncontrollably. And when the father was asking, what's wrong? Emily, what's wrong? Or Jane, what's wrong? And the daughter was saying, Dad, where are the baboons that you said you are working with? I want to see the baboons. When you come home, you always say, you see the baboons I work with. I want to see the baboons. Where are the baboons? And that's what happened when you badmouth someone to other people, because it will come up and put you in a very serious situation where in fact you have resolved your issue. Now you will go back. You'll go back because now the other one is going to be saying, but you spoke to me about, you spoke about me to X and Y. And that will take you back. So exposing their shortcomings or complaining to others can add to the problem than solve it. Complaining about your spouse has long-lasting effects. When the issue has passed and you have moved on, the people you told are still where you left them. Be careful. What are the do's? Get advice, counseling, and or help. It's healthy to talk through challenges and get new perspectives. Get advice from trusted sources is always helpful. Just be careful to avoid the bad mouthing even with trusted sources. Bad mouthing is talking to people without them knowing. Is talking about people without them knowing. So if you decide to go and see someone and in the session you talk about your husband or your wife, that's not bad mouthing. Bad mouthing is when you talk about them without them knowing. The final one is make sure when you try to diffuse the fights, you don't let it fester. There's a wound that is there. Don't let the wound fester, because the wound leads to anger. How do you deal with anger? Is something that you need to identify. Attempting to bottle up your hurt or anger is like a tea kettle that's boiling and will spill over at any moment. Find a healthy channel to deal with your anger. Ephesians 4:26 and 27 spell it out pretty clearly. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Don't avoid an issue with your spouse. There are people who are afraid to talk to their spouses. They prefer not to tell them the truth. They agree with their spouses when in fact deep inside they know they don't agree. That's a very dangerous thing to do, because tomorrow you're going to say, anyway, I didn't agree with what you were saying. And it is going to make the other one angry, because you lied to them. You said you agree when you know you don't agree. So don't avoid an issue with your spouse. Keeping your feelings bottled up only extends the bitterness and argument. The charm of ignoring your problems is short-lived. Don't live as if there's nothing wrong. There's something wrong. Deal with it. What do you need to do? Take a break, calm down, then with a clear mind address the issue promptly. Make a conscious effort to put out fires when they are small and manageable. Left to fester, if they are left to fester, problems can become a bigger blaze. Interesting story of the whole saying that says there's an elephant in the room comes from that. The story goes that there was an ant that was creating a problem in the room, and those who were in the room did not take care of the ant until it grew up to become as big as an elephant. So now that they can't deal with the big elephant, people will always talk about the elephant in the room. We have to deal with the elephant in the room. And the learning in that story is that if you dealt with the elephant whilst it was still an ant, you will not have an elephant in the room. Finally, no different garden path. Changing the topic won't change anything. Don't run away from the issue by changing the topic. If we're talking about you today, don't bring what I did last week or last month. Let's deal with one thing at a time. And we get it, conflict isn't fun, and we typically want it to be over with as quickly as possible. But trying to change the subject and pretend nothing happened won't change anything. Moving to the next issue doesn't solve the first issue. It's very easy to get off topic during the heat of an argument. Don't bring up past issues. Don't bring up other people. Don't bring unrelated issues into the argument. And all these things must be discussed and agreed on. That let's focus on this one. We're going to talk about the other issues and the other people. We're not running away from talking about them. Comparing your spouse to other people or dragging up the past does not benefit either of you. What are the do's? Keep focused on the problem at hand. It's easy to get off topic when you are upset, but staying on topic can diffuse most arguments before they explode. Pray about engagement on the issues of concern. What are the 5 takeaways? The 5 takeaways are: listen actively. Feelings are always valid. Don't dismiss people who are saying to you, I feel that you don't respect me, and you say, but those are feelings. I want concrete evidence. Feelings are always valid. Create space for them. Take responsibility in your fights. The two of you have fought, take responsibility. accept outcome. And after that, you must pray together. That's the end of session 1. I want us to then take questions for 15 minutes, and then probably after that take a 5-minute break if that's what you want. I'm being advised that let's take a 5 minutes break. The time is now 4:30. Let's come back at about 22. Let's take a 10 minutes break. Come back at about 22, and the advice is probably don't log off. Leave your screen as it is, so that you don't struggle to come back again. Is that fine? We'll be back at 22.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's fine. Enkosi kakhulu, siyabulela.
Yes.
Yes, it's fine.
He's on fire.